Hello, and welcome back to a new series called Movie Reviews. And today we're going to spoil the movie The Nun 2.
Hi, I'm going to be skipping parts of the first scene. We're going to skip straight to the first death.
So the priest is now lifted up into the air by the demon. His arms are like in a cross shape, like he's being crucified, and he is burned alive while the boy watches on. And all you see then is the silhouette of the nun on the outside of the church, slowly getting smaller into going into the body of a handyman who's just walking around with a briefcase and a hat. Um, we don't see the handyman's face. We don't see the who he is, how he looks like. We just see him walking towards the camera. And in the next scene, there are five or six nuns trying to push a van out the mud as it's stuck, and Reverend Mother, so the elder nun, calls out to Irene, who is also Irene. So there's two names to hers, to the nun, to the main character nun who's introduced, and she's told to go to another nun called Deborah, who turns out to be Irene's friend, to because she's not confessing. So about her sins, and then ends up confessing to Irene, who's trustworthy. So she confessed that her brother's been sent to war while she's being a nun, and she doesn't. She once her father told her that she should serve God, and well, the thing is, she didn't really want to be a nun, Deborah. So that's the reason she confessed, and in a way, gets that burden off her chest. Basically, the main point of that is that Deborah confesses that she would rather be in the shoes of her brother than be a nun. The next scene cuts to the Reverend Mother with a circle of nuns, Deborah included, whilst Irene or Irene is just at the table sorting stuff out, pretending to sort stuff out, to listening to the conversation. And the Reverend Mother talks about the demon being in the form of a nun, and the theme is that the demon will challenge your faith and weaken your soul. So this theme is consistent throughout the movie. The Reverend Mother tells the nuns to believe that the blood of Christ, i.e., the wine, is the way that the nun can be killed. But the other nun, Deborah, seems to not believe this miracle and makes fun of it in a way by scoffing by to herself. One crucial detail of the story, when the Reverend Mother is telling the story of the nun and the girl who went mental, the nun who went mental, well, Irene is in the corner of the room trying to sort stuff out, pretending to sort stuff out, and her face is in disgust, in confusion, that as if the story resonates with her, and it's a story which she's familiar with, and it's being told wrong, and we'll find out later why this is. In the next scene, three more characters are introduced. So a guy called Maurice, who's just seen uh, of a school, and we find out that a character called Kate is also introduced. Maurice, Kate, they introduce each other, they say hi to each other, along with a schoolgirl called Sophie. Maurice is seen going around the school as his job is to just fix things and water his plants and take care of his garden. And three bullies are introduced. I call them the bullies throughout this video. They're three little blonde girls, four characters introduced at the same time: principal, three bullies, and of course Maurice, Sophie, and Kate. A French housekeeping girl is introduced in the next scene, a house within the quarters of the boarding school, to do her normal job, but no one answers. So then she walks in to do her job. And as she enters the house, she hears choking noises. So she goes to check it out. Then she sees a man standing in front of a mirror in the bathroom, and who does it turn out to be? It turns out to be Maurice, in a trance-like state, making those choking sounds, like, which startles the French girl. She then, tries to get out the house, get out the room, goes down the dark corridor again towards the exit, and then it closes. Then you see a nun figure, the actual nun figure, appear from down the corridor, dark corner of the corridor, and all you see is the sharp teeth of the nun, you know, eyes and mouth wide open. The French girl, as she turns around, she's thrown up in the air. She's in the air, and her neck's cracked into two pieces. Irene is seen sleeping in her quarters, and apparently, supposedly, Reverend Mother wakes her up, says, "Sister, you have a visitor." And well, she goes to check it out. As she's walking down the stairs, she calls out to Reverend Mother. She's not there at all. And then she sees a man standing in the dark corner of the same room, and she calls out to him, "Maurice." And all you hear Maurice say is whisper, "Save me, sister," and lets out a roar with his sharp teeth dripping with blood towards Irene. Irene then listens to her again and goes to the main hall, where she sees the Pope just sitting there in the hall having his meal. So meaning they were both real situations, like the second time Reverend Mother called her and the Pope being in the main hall. So he's having his meal and he's explaining to Irene that Father Burke has died. He was killed by a handyman. The first scene that we saw in this movie, he was killed by a handyman. The nun that was with him was Irene. We find out in the scene that they were the ones who dealt with the demon in the first scene, in the first movie. Irene insists that she got lucky, and she can't perform miracles again, and the Pope insists that no, you can do miracles and you can do it again. The train journey, so we just see a steam train. This is 1956, as I said before, and in comes Deborah, and Deborah says she wants to join her, and Irene basically says, you're not ready, you don't have strong faith like the other nuns did. There was a whole group of nuns that were dealing with the bad nun, the demon, and they all died. They had high amounts of faith, yet they still died, and you don't. So how are you going to expect to deal with the nun? Then Deborah says, you need me. Irene explains that the whole gist of our religion is having faith. This is what pays off. This is what we're going to use to fight this demon. Explains in the scene that the wine becomes the blood of Christ because we believe. And Deborah agrees. So then she gives in to the explanation. Irene then says, "I hope you find your faith when you need it most." So contradicting what she already said, what Irene said, and proving that Deborah was right. Have faith in wine that becomes the blood of Christ. But Irene insists that no, you have to have this faith to deal with this demon, and that's what pays off. And the three bullies appear and, in a way, apologize to Sophie about the way they treated her, and Sophie forgives them. So then the bullies pretend to play with Sophie, so they don't play with her, they just take her down to the Forbidden Chapel, so the downstairs chapel, which we find out that Sophie says, this chapel is off limits, why are we here? It's not allowed. They go there anyway because Sophie now trusts them. From the chapel window, which has some art on it, so on the top there's a goat, and with an eye, one eye visible. The main bully, the girl, says, we have to play a game called Defy the Devil. She tries to run back out the Forbidden Chapel, but as she's running out, the bullies giggle and close the door on her. And then Sophie sees a shadow slowly go into the cloth that's just left standing there as the statue fell, and it's like a person's there with the cloth draped over their head, of a person underneath a cloth, and it walks towards Sophie as it's showing its teeth. So the teeth are visible whilst it's walking towards Sophie, and then it just falls and breaks down. The statue breaks. As all this is happening in the dark chapel, Forbidden Chapel, Maurice enters, says, "Sophie, what happened?" And then he would have escorted her, but Kate is there now, the teacher. And in this scene, we realize Kate is Sophie's mum. She says, "Sorry, mum, And well, that was weird because the whole time we thought it's just her teacher. So the scene cuts to the church from scene one, Tarascon, France, and Irene is there, Deborah is there, um, and Irene has a vision of ashes falling from inside the church, of how the priest died, whether it's priest Noret. But yeah, she feels ashes drop from the sky as she's indoors, and she also has another vision of a boy walking in from the church doors behind her, and she turns around and the boy hands her a rosary, which is a chain or a pendulum or just a cross. It's called a rosary in this film, from the previous priest that died from the ashes. So priest Noret, priest Berke. Let's call him priest Noret. So yeah, she's handed this cross, but then yeah, she's back in the present now. So no longer is she thinking about this boy who gave her a cross or the father who died from ashes. She's now in the present moment. She doesn't have the rosary in her hand anymore. It's vanished, and that was just part of a vision. So Deborah asks, "Are you okay?" to Irene. The nun who's giving the tour tells Irene about the boy called Jack who was present at the scene. He was also the boy who Irene had a vision of, who passed her the rosary, but he wasn't actually there. So Irene asked, "Where can I find this boy?" Around the streets, just anywhere really, but he'll be playing football, and his name's Jack. Who's giving the tour of the Tarascon church also names a traveler known as Frenche, and at the same time Irene also says Frenche at the same time, because she knows this handyman who is Irene already knows him. The scene cuts to Maurice. So in the past, after the first Nun movie, so apparently after the first movie, he was on his way to Hungary. He's a Romanian traveler who wanted to see the world, and well, Irene and Maurice are talking, having a good time. Maurice apparently saved Irene back in the first part, at St. Carter. Irene then gives him a tomato seed to start his dream farm, which is his ultimate. So then later on, Irene explains this to Deborah, minus the tomato seed. The tomato seed is not mentioned, but yeah, that's how he got possessed. That he went back for Irene, and the nun was basically grabbing hold of Maurice, and basically whatever's inside the nun went into Maurice. Maurice tending to his plants and vegetables and fruits, wherever he's planted, tomatoes as well, tomatoes, and in the porch, in the boarding school, in the middle of it. And Kate, the teacher, Sophie's mum, comes up to him and thanks him for dealing with the bullies, and because Sophie said what she said to Kate, we don't know, and but we know what happened, obviously. Yeah, Sophie's watching from a distance. Sophie notices that something's wrong with Maurice, whereas everyone else is just playing around, running around, playing, the other girls. And then Sophie hears her mum call out to her. Says Sophie, but then obviously she follows the voice. She follows Kate, so he comes across a corridor. So she opens the door, and this corridor is very, very familiar. It's the yellow corridor from Conjuring series, where the nun walks towards the left while Lorraine and the daughter see the nun in their own house. And this corridor is really significant, but then all Sophie sees is the nun-like figure, like fully dressed in a nun costume. But if it's a dummy, we don't know. It looks like a dummy. So then crows fly out from the corridor, runs all the way down the stairs. But as she's running down the stairs, there's a wall that has a nun's silhouette. So she can see the costume of the nun. And as she thinks it's all over, Kate opens the doors to her classroom, letting light into the corridor, stairway, and Kate actually interrupts the nun's almost killing of Sophie. Irene goes out for some fresh air because it's panic mode. There's no reservation at the hotel. To complete their mission of going towards the demon, and what happens next is Irene sees Jack playing football with his friends in the streets at night, so it's nighttime, and she asks him about the rosary, the pendant that he took, apparently in her vision, and Jack admits that he's taken it and he has it, but then as he was talking, the boys rush through with the football again. He goes with the crowd and, runs off on his own away from the crowd. So he first runs into the crowd, but then we could see Jack with the football going towards a dark alley himself, and of course Irene follows him. So she's supposedly following Jack through dark alleys and comes across a intersection where there's a bunch of magazines, hundreds of magazines on the wall, and a shadow appears. So she looks behind her and she doesn't see anything. So she looks back at the magazines, which are flipping vigorously. Flip to one page of a nun-like figure in the magazines altogether. So they all flip to one page. Then as she looks back towards the magazines, she's strangled by the nun who's come out with the magazines. And as she's being strangled, she has visions of that a priest in a white man in a priest uniform, is in front of a blazing fire, and he's got a dagger in his hand. And Saint Lucy, the person depicted in this vision, is the lady who's on the floor, crouching down. The priest gets the dagger out, stabs her 3 times to the eyes, and Saint Lucy is holding a case. So whilst her eyes were lit up, so figure is holding an unusual case. So we don't know what this case is. Case of what's inside the case, we don't know. And then all we see is Irene is unconscious on the floor, and Deborah appears out of nowhere. See in the next scene is Maurice in a trance-like state, facing the door. The principal has gone out to explore for some bloody reason. She's in her 60s or over 60. Torch, she's examining, what is he doing, and then he wakes up from his trance after hearing the principal's voice. Basically tells him to go back to his quarters. But yeah, so he goes back to his quarters, and as she's turning around to go back to her quarters after Maurice has left, she hears her dead child call out to her, and she knows he's dead. We don't. So she follows the voice into the dark pitch forbidden chapel, which Maurice was in front of in a trance-like state. In the light, she sees a child in a red costume with his head drooped down, pale face, hair down, and all we can see is a nun's hand over his shoulder, so controlling him. But she doesn't notice the hand behind the child. She just notices the child. What he does is use the anchor in his hand, the abnormally heavy anchor in his hand, to swinging it around, trying to hurt her. She's like, stop, stop, stop. And what happens is she's backing away. As she's backing away, there's a metal hook, a sharp one as well, and it drops on her head. She's dead on the spot. So Irene wakes up after she was, unconscious for a while after being strangled by the nun. She wakes up in her bed at the hotel, and she explains the vision to Deborah about how the demon nun is using Maurice to get an ancient relic of what she wants, and when finished with Maurice and getting the relic, she will kill him. Deborah says Jack gave the pendant, the rosary, to her whilst Irene was unconscious, and they then compare the rosary of Priest Noré, which is given by Jack, to the one in the image. And in order to find a link between the one in the image and the one that they've been given, and the similar story of how a priest died, they go to Catholic archives to a friend who can help them uncover the truth. Cut to Irene and Deborah in the Catholic archives. They reveal that the demon's after is an ancient relic, which is the eyes of Saint Lucy. So the vision that that Irene had about the priest stabbing Saint Lucy through the eyes. Her descendants ran away after Saint Lucy was killed, and hid the ancient relic somewhere in the mortal world. So what Irene and Deborah get to know is that an ancient relic is a pair of eyes, Deborah seemed confused, and well, these aren't just a pair of eyes, these are an ancient relic which would send the demon back to hell. And they find out that the demon is actually a former angel, and this relic will give it godlike powers. But this can also be sent to, this can also send the devil, the demon, back to hell. So Irene and Deborah make their way quickly to the location, which is revealed as the boarding school, which was Jean Paul's monastery, and it was a wine cellar, and then it's a boarding school now. And so they rush to the boarding school at the dead of night. Maurice falls into a trance-like state again, and this time falls to the floor. And as he falls to the floor, his neck is revealed to have an upside-down cross on it that Kate sees. And Kate questions this, you've got a mark on your neck, what is this? And Maurice doesn't know about it because obviously he didn't see this himself. And at that moment, behind Sophie, the painting of the nun, the demon, comes to life with bloody teeth, and Sophie screams in panic mode, pure panic, and they all run out the room, running towards the exit to get out of the boarding school. And at that moment, Irene and Deborah walk in and tell Maurice, get away from them. Irene lets Maurice know that it's inside of you. The demon takes over Maurice's body fully after being revealed to be inside of him, and he gives a sinister look smile and then says, hello sister, and then walks towards the Forbidden Chapel. Maurice, she jumps on Maurice's back, tried to stop him, but then she's also slammed to the floor. And what happens next is gonna shock you. Screaming in agony with his hands over his head to make the prayer stop. But then as Deborah also comes back on her feet, she hits Maurice over the head with a bat, knocking him unconscious. The ancient relic is there because they were told by the Catholic archives that the ancient relic will be in this boarding school. He tells them about the Silly Goat game, the Defy the Devil game, tells them that that goat represents the devil, and if you look into its eyes with a ray of light shining through it, the devil will be summoned. And so Deborah goes round the other side. So Deborah shines the light through the goat's eye in the window, the Forbidden Chapel window, while Kate and Irene and Sophie are on the other side inside the Forbidden Chapel. And the location of the relic is revealed. It cuts to the two bullies. So out of the three bullies, the two of them, the main one and the second bully, they hear noises of someone walking above at on the floorboards. Yeah, she walks out of that room, and Deborah at the same time walks out of the towards the Forbidden Chapel, but obviously hears footsteps from above. He's further that someone's there, and as Deborah's shining the light, we can see what she can see. So parts of a goat, the devil itself, has appeared in goat form. So the scene cuts to Irene and Kate, and the relic is finally dug up. They have the relic in their hands. So they don't open it, they just keep it to themselves. And guess who walks in? Maurice. And he's possessed again, and he's not in a trance, he's actually fully raging because the nun knows that her game is... And he charges at Irene, strangles her up in the air, and then Sophie grabs the relic and runs out the room, whilst Maurice is busy trying to kill Irene, who's revealed herself fully. So she's no longer inside Maurice's body, and Irene is reading out prayers to help stop the nun, but it renders it useless because the nun, the demon, has put Deborah in chains around her neck and is dragging her along, and this makes Irene instinctively stop reading her prayers. And what happens next is, because the prayers have stopped, Irene is now focused on saving Deborah. The nun lifts Irene up with her demonic powers, just like she did with the first priest in the first scene, makes her, into a cross-like shape. Her arms are raised to her side. Now she's going to be blazed on fire. So as she's being blazed on fire, Irene is screaming in agony. The fire is coincidentally not affecting Irene because she's the descendant of Saint Lucy. So she's one of the descendants that, you know, haven't died, that haven't been killed by the nun, and, you know, she's not affected by the blazing fire. And what happens is she has a vision of her mum, her, like, that she'll always be with her, and the same scenes that, you know, already happened in the movie. The corridor scene with the nun portrayed there. Deborah says that's a miracle under her breath. You know, she's witnessing Irene not being burned alive. Sophie is trapped, you know, in the same room, but with sharp things coming out from either side. Maurice is going to go stab her, but then Irene tells Deborah, pray with me, and they read through prayers. The whole chamber that they're in is covered in wine because it used to be a wine cellar. So they use the wine to read prayers on the wine, and then wine gushes out from either side, from the barrels, bursting onto the nun, which burns her alive. So Maurice is now free of the demon, as Irene has and Deborah have read prayers, and the nun is now killed, burned alive, where Maurice apologizes to Kate and Sophie about what he did because he was aware of what he did as the demon took over him. And Irene sees off Maurice, and the credits roll. But now Lorraine and Ed Warren are now present in the end credits, which means that they're going to be in the next Nun, or there's going to be another Conjuring. We don't know. Is true is that Lorraine and Ed Warren will be in the next movie, whether it's the Nun or Conjuring. As we already know, Irene is the descendant of Saint Lucy, and one more person who has the same type of visions as Irene is Lorraine, who is also in the credit scene from Conjuring series. And what we can say is that Irene and Lorraine could both be distant relatives, since they both had the same visions, they both had the same powers of, you know, being psychic, and yeah, they could just be distant relatives, is one theory. Some positives for the movie of The Nun 2. The fact that Maurice was used for the plot. You know, the plot was obviously Maurice trying to find the relic in different countries, which is why he was traveling all over the place. And, you know, being able to be himself whilst, well, he wasn't himself, but the nun made it feel like he was being himself, was a great touch to the plot. And the fact that Maurice, the possessed Maurice, destroyed the relic of Saint Lucy was also, you know, that point, when I was in the audience, I was thinking, what the hell, all hope is lost. That was the relic that would send the demon back to hell, but it was destroyed. But the thing that I didn't like was, you know, the blood of Christ, you know, the wine. It would have been used to vanquish the demon in the previous plot, whereas in this plot it was reused again, rinsed again. I thought the whole point of the movie was the relic being used to send the demon back to hell, but that also gives the demon powers. So it was kind of 50-50 there. But the character of Irene was a positive as well. The facial expressions that Irene had during the earlier scenes, such as when she was overhearing the Reverend Mother and the nuns, the good nuns, speaking about the demon. One more crucial detail that Irene and Lorraine could be relatives, or distant relatives, is the fact that, you know, when Irene was being burned alive by the nun, she had the same vision that, you know, that played out in real life, Sophie in the corridor, but, you know, Sophie wasn't seen in the vision. You know, the yellow corridor was there, the nun was there, but it wasn't explained how, you know, Irene could see that vision, because it wasn't explained beforehand. You know, that's the only vision that wasn't explained. The rest of the visions were, and the positives were that, you know, the visions were in the right order mostly, and it was explained really well. The only vision that wasn't explained was the yellow corridor, the same scene from Conjuring 2. That was, you know, when the nun was walking past the corridor and Lorraine and her daughter were looking at the nun going through the corridor, the yellow corridor of their house. Irene saw the same vision, but it didn't really correlate with, you know, Irene's version of the events, you know, because Sophie was the one that saw the nun in the yellow corridor, and Lorraine and her daughter was the only one that saw the yellow corridor and the nun in there. So Irene seeing that scene didn't really make sense when she was being burned alive. Oh, and the principal as a character was really unnecessary. So we didn't know her backstory. We didn't know, who her kid was, whether he's dead or alive. We know that she was going in the Forbidden Chapel, which means, it's the echoes of her dead uh, family or members of close members of friends and family. But we didn't really know much about her, and adding her as a character was really unnecessary, and making her plot of when she died in the Forbidden Chapel, it was kind of it was a bit of a waste of time. I didn't like were the goat scenes. They were kind of like filler scenes. By the time they dug up the relic, they were just like filler scenes to say, there's other things happening, there's action, so it won't be boring. But if they made all the goat scenes at one time and explained that, and then made all the relic scenes separately, so like the digging up the relic, showing that all at once, and then the nun coming out of Maurice and destroying the relic and things like that, it would be a much better film in terms of the excitement, and it wouldn't really cut the tension every time it cuts to the goat scenes. That was actually quite annoying. It disturbs the relic scenes. And some positives, so the jump scares were good, but TikTok trailers of the movie ruined it some of the time. So the relic scenes weren't shown in the TikTok trailers, but the jump scares were shown in the trailers. So doing that really ruined it for us as an audience. Well, for me, that is. And the priest protecting the order, the plot of the priest protecting the order, protecting the relic from the demon, was a great part of the plot, and him dying first made sense. The visions were in order. The overall, I would give the movie a 7 out of 10 because of the great jump scares. The casting of Irene was perfect. The jump scares were good, and I would say the overall plot of the story of finding the relic and Maurice going from country to country was a great addition. Oh, and finally, the thing that gives it a 7 out of 10 is the fact that The Nun 2 was far better than The Nun 1. So the first movie was quite of a drag. It made the scenes a bit boring. They didn't really have any filler scenes on the side. So the goat scene in a way in Nun 2 was good, but if it was separated from the relic scene, it would have made more sense, rather than cutting from scene to scene. So they need to have a balance of that from Nun 1 and Nun 2, of not having too many filler scenes. Thanks for watching, and please like, subscribe, and share, and comment if you will, and peace.